Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Bridget Bray, and I work as the Nancy C. Allen Curator and Director of Exhibitions at Asia Society, Texas. We're delighted to have you with us this evening and to welcome the artists Laura Drey and Brandon Taw Harris, who are both featured in our current exhibition, Artists on Site. I want to say a special thank you to both artists, as well as Ashley De Hoyos, and of course, all of you for making time to be with us. Artists on Site is a special project at Asia Society, and it's going to be on view through January 24th. So if you have a chance to visit the galleries after learning more about what the artists are working on, we'd love to have you visit. Please make time for that before it closes on the 24th. You can check our website for details. I also would like to share that next Wednesday, the 20th, we'll gather with the artists Ahra and Royal Sumikat for another webcast, and we hope you can be with us for that too. Briefly, the structure for tonight is that we'll have a presentation by both artists, and then that'll be followed by conversation with Ashley and me. We welcome your questions throughout, and you can share them with us via the chat. I'm going to just briefly mention bios here, but the full details will also be listed in the chat, so please look out for that, as well as the artists' websites and Instagram. Laura Drey is a visual artist, writer, and educator who lives in Houston, where she was born and raised. Her work explores themes of labor and movement, geography, government, race, class, and economics. Brandon Taw Harris is an interdisciplinary artist based in Houston. His work incorporates self-portraiture, his family archives, and historical images portraying the Vietnam War, which provides viewers a deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding migration. My co-moderator for the evening is Ashley De Hoyos. Ashley was one of the nominators that worked with the Asia Society team as we developed the Artists on Site initiative. She is curator at DiverseWorks and works with artists, activists, and cultural producers to explore the gallery as a space for cultural exchange. With that, Laura, we're going to turn it over to you to share your presentation.
So I'd like to start by offering up a quote by the American essayist Thomas de Quincey. What else than a natural and mighty palimpsest is the human brain? Everlasting layers of ideas, images, and feelings have been fallen upon your brain, soft as light. Each succession has seemed to bury all that went before, and yet, in reality, not one has been extinguished. There it is.
Pero sí tienes que probarla de el 20 de noviembre. Igual, pero el sabor es diferente. Yo creo que por lo que se acumulan todas, igual le pasé a la tiene mucho sabor. De la manera más sencilla se acabó.
The writer Isabel Allende wrote, "Roots are not in a landscape or a country or a people. They are inside of you." This slide shows images of the work at its first iteration. I'm working with tissue, and my thoughts in the practice at the time were with notions of identity, personal identity, cultural identity. I'm wondering where it is that I enter into this conversation of identity as I hold two spaces. The author Ralph Ellison said, "And it is through our names that we first place ourselves in the world. Our names being the gift of others must be made our own." The material choices for this body of work are often found in the farming industry. They are polypropylene, burlap, twist ties, to name a few. For as long as I can remember, these materials were a staple found in my grandparents' backyard shed. As kids, we would often play and pretend that we were selling our own fruits and vegetables in the market. Through this play is how I learned to pick oranges and apples from the backyard in my grandparents' home. This is Adamar and Ada. When I find myself in the midst of obstacles or simply in need of new direction, I like to go to farmers markets. And there's quite a few here in Houston. Every other Saturday or so, you can find them. I also like to pull over on the side of the road if I'm heading out of town and go to these markets and lose myself in them. For me, to go into the market is a grounding tool. The things that I hear there, like the sounds and the smells and the color, they're all grounding tools as they play on my senses. And this is where I met Ada and Adamar. Here we got to talking one day, and they shared with how they crossed 3 different countries to get to where they are now, which is here in Houston. At some point in this sharing, Adamar left the conversation. He was really quiet and he left. And I wondered about that. And as we wrapped up and talked about things, and I was saying my goodbyes, Adamar returned and he was smiling. And it was a nice surprise because I was very concerned about how he felt when he walked up and left. And it was also surprising because when he returned, he handed me a box of several different materials. And those are the materials that I'm using today. And he began telling me his own story about the materials and how he liked to use them for different things. Like the large green ones were used for putting the limes and the peanuts, and the orange colored ones, he'd fill them with oranges. The green square bins depended on the season. He'd fill them sometimes with strawberries or okra or cherries. And then he piled on a bag of carrots and he said, "And that's just for you and your good health and for dinner tonight." As he gifted me the materials, his words were, "Para sus historias y el arte," which translates to "for the storytelling and for the art." This is Terra Preta Farm. Through the Idea Fund, I was granted the support in researching and exploring firsthand sights and sounds of the Texas borderlands that are found along the Rio Grande Valley. These are towns that were often brought up in the conversations and interviews that I had with family members and strangers across And so I wondered what it would be like, never having been there myself. My mom had not returned in a long time, and my children had not been there. So I wondered what a intergenerational conversation would be. What would it be like to travel? And so these next images are images of the signs that are seen up along the freeways, and they're really big, and they just kind of like were zinging me, like, wow, this was from that story, this was from this story. And I was taken because I really began to understand even more what was being said in the shared stories of past. And here the land was so different, much greener than I expected. Again, I had not been down that far south before. Um, and it was just so green and lush, and then like spots of new technology imposing itself. And again, taken to be seeing signs like Mexico just down the street, or Free Trade International Bridge, or the Rios right around the corner. And again, just making further connections to the people and the past and the history, helping me find and navigate myself in this world. The work was very impactful, or the experience was very impactful to not only my art making, but to the writing. And I'd like to share some of that with you right now. And I'd like to read a poem. It's called Cruzando. Family crossing bridges into a future, valleys and coastlines, meandering waterways feeding the land, one end to another. Men working the fields, sweet golden rows of citrus, berries, and melons, one end to another. Women all day together and alone, scared to move because they don't know how. Fields of gold are not for them. Under a bridge, babies in arms, all day together and alone. For some, modernity is mobility and independence, job and wealth, leisure and travel. For them, it's trekking the land in dark nights, dodging spotlights, escaping a perilous past, yearning for new tomorrows as modernity passes them by. They stand tucked away at the underpass. They are not seen. They are invisible, but lo tengo que hacer. They have seen the things not meant for them, but lo tengo que hacer. They still see a future, but lo tengo que hacer. And because they have a will that can be broken, they remain exhausted even after a full night's rest. They are disheartened despite the hope that the crops yield. They are overwhelmed by their fears even after they let go. They are scared of the freedom that is meant to lift them up. So they get carried away, invisibly drifting, but moving, still. Tenemos que hacerlo. So the next images are also some of the works that were impacted by this experience. This first image here is a burlap bag. The origination of the bag came from Raymondville. So needless to say, when I saw the sign Raymondville, we're like, we're stopping here. Just to, it took me back to the stories behind this bag and the people that I met and my own personal narratives that stemmed from here. I'm also talking about location. In the practice, I'm thinking about what it means to locate yourself. The second one here is roughly an outline of Cameron County. It's the lower tip of Texas, and it holds a lot of the towns or the places that were mentioned throughout the interviews and shared stories. And so again, to actually be there in person and come to a better understanding. also what it meant for me and how do I enter this conversation. This next image here, talking about location, I was even further away from where I call home. I had an opportunity to go to Oaxaca, Mexico, and where there I undertook the task of learning to weave using the backstrap loom. And here I'm using all natural materials, and then I introduce, current day technology with these plastics. These images here are the works in progress as they are in the gallery. And if you are able to come and visit, you'll be able to see them as they scale out into the space. I see these sheets here as sort of palimpsest, as I mentioned earlier, where you're either writing history or names and making a mark and noting your history and then rewriting it and always finding residue of it as you move forward. So there are some where you can read out and there are others that you can't. And I build out the work as a way for the audience to locate themselves. So it's grounded here, a location, and then to allow the audience to navigate themselves and ponder these stories and their own as well. And this other slide here, one of the things that I'm really excited to do here with some of this space is to continue exploring that space and building out the project even more. And I've been able to introduce some film and audio. In the studio, when making these particular works, questions of labor came to mind. Whose labor? Invisible labor, manual labor, a woman's hands at work. This detail here shows location as well. And in some of these, I've written stories. I leave you with this presentation and an offering of a fruit bowl that is very special to me. Thank you.
Okay, Brandon, we'll pivot to your presentation now before we start our conversation.
Hello, my name is Brandon Harris. A lot of my work is derived from my family's experience, and a lot of that is a history that is not spoken about when I was growing up. So for me, coming to terms with this past and this trauma and this identity is really what my work is about. It comes through storytelling, through archival images, and really opens up dialogue between my families for us to understand this trauma and to put it to rest and to heal from this trauma. The first image is of my grandparents. This is one of the very few images that they brought when they migrated from Vietnam during the Vietnam War. This image is very powerful to me. It has a lot of wear and tear, and it really shows the path and the resilience of them. And I'd always start off with this image, and it really inspires my work, and they just look so cute. Here's an image in the space. A lot of my work is derived from looking into my own family archives, looking into historical images and how they were portrayed, how the Vietnamese refugees were portrayed in the war. So a lot of these images I pulled from my family archive in the US after they first migrated, and then some images that family members in Vietnam still sent back to us in the US, along with maps, images from like Life magazines, which really was a way that documented the Vietnam War. Um, and I also took some quotes from different advertisements and different stories within the same magazines documenting the Vietnam War that could also apply to the stories of the Vietnamese refugees. For an example, one of them says, "My instincts told me it was time to go." And I think that could really apply to my family's urgency to escape the war right when it ended. So this piece is an installation I did. It really came together at the Asia Society. This wasn't planned before anything. I was really in the space. It was very a white cube space, and it felt kind of weird or unnatural to work with. It didn't feel like home, or like it didn't have like a sacred, calming, ritualistic feel to it. And I kind of made recreated an altar. So on the right side is an altar. Most of the objects in there are from my mom and my grandma, who graciously let me take all their stuff. And as well as some paper objects that are used to burn to send to our ancestors. And then adjacent to that is the 4 panels of pearl shell inlaid into black lacquer, telling the story of Vietnam succeeding from China by 2 sisters and an army of women. And on the top is a clothesline with 2 traditional Vietnamese garments that belong to my parents, which the fan blows at, activating the space and creating like a symbol of ancestral and really tying the history of Vietnam to the altar and to the spirits of that. Here's a little closer image of that. And there's also like a little paper iPhone and iPad for the ancestors there. And then here's another close up. On the left image, you can see this paper suit and that you would send to your ancestors. And on the right is fake money. This is Josh's paper, and you would send that as well. So for the space here at Asia Society, I've been funded by the Houston Art Alliance and the Idea Fund for this project. So I've been working on creating this wooden boat created by woods found from sites of mass Vietnamese migration. So this is the outcome of it. And I was really grateful to have the space to put it in somewhere that wasn't my garage, and to document it and photograph it, and to put the dirt, which I've been collecting for so long. And originally I was gonna put the dirt inside to show it, but I wanted the boat to be uplifted and to be on the land. And the weavings along the boat, which are the red and yellow, are of the Vietnamese flags, of the North and South Vietnamese flags, which is also like the South and the current Vietnamese flag because they took over. They're woven together and creates these gaps, and it plays with the spaces of them. And the pieces of the blues and the whites in the boat are taken from a Vietnamese shrimper and fisherman boat that was capsized along the shores around Seabrook, Texas, that I found. And then here's the boat. Inside the boat are belongings from my family, my own clothing. It has Vietnamese hats, my mom's Vietnamese, English Vietnamese dictionary, because a lot of the belongings they had to throw over the boat so they can fit more refugees in. My mom told me a story when they were in a boat similar to this size. The Navy found them, and they only said that they will pick them up and take them to the US if they were going to dump all their belongings into the water so they can fit more refugees in. So it's a matter of losing all identity, all sense of yourself for a new life, or to just be in the water with no direction, no place to go. And I also put in some images into the boat, kind of to recollect those lost images that my family did when they had to bury their documents and photographs to conceal their identities, almost like a self erasure of their identities as an act of survival. The background is a video piece I've been working on, and I just did for my last year in school at U of H, which I've been exploring the liminal space of migration through the lens of Google Earth, which um, for me, I'm searching throughout my family homes, and in my family home, where my family home would be in Vietnam, which slowly abstracts and obscures that searching and longing for the home. And then in the audio is my mom talking about her home in Vietnam, and a voicemail from my grandma talking about how important family is, which I will play a little clip later. This is one of the weird abstractions of this space that seems so familiar yet so obscured. And then here's a little clip, excerpt.
I wish we would have taken more photographs of us when we were younger, because we really don't have any pictures of us, what we look like, or memories, that we can capture on photographs. Because back then, my father was a military captain, and when we left our house, we had to bury all our photos, all the pictures and photographs, because we didn't want to have any evidence of our father being in the military, because if he gets captured, he would be, taken prisoners. So that's why everything was buried in, in the backyard. So the only pictures was like a couple photos of us when we were young in my dad's wallet. That's all we have. We don't have anything else. And I think that's something we wish we had more memories, of photos.
I also been exploring the notions of migration through the lens as referencing water, and how the water becomes this refugee space, this migration space. You're in between state, which takes me to a series of these images I've been working on and was inspired at being at the Asia Society, and also looking at my video that I made so much. I've been playing with a toy camera, a Holga, which has these like weird light leaks, abstractions. You can do multiple exposures. So I've been revisiting sites for this project that I was working on, such as Seabrook, Texas, old and new Chinatowns, micro apartment complexes, and my family homes throughout Houston. So these are some photos that I've taken from around Seabrook, Texas, and I have some more film developing as we speak by the Flat Slabs. Highly recommend. And this was along the coast where the water meets the land. And this is of the boat that I took materials from to make my boat. And it was a Vietnamese boat, and it had a Vietnamese name on it. But it also had Trump graffitied on it and hashtag MAGA on it, which I also think speaks to the oppression of the Vietnamese community in the Gulf Coast when they first came and were working these shrimper and fisherman jobs, because a lot of them thought that they were taking work from them And also their experiences with the Ku Klux Klan along the Gulf Coast was very prominent. And this was a little sofa or a bed that I found in uh in the fields around there, which almost resembles like a body to me. This is along the water, and I really been enjoying the playing with the Holga, because I kind of being in school for photography with all the assignments, I kind of slowly was moving into sculptures. By the time I graduate, my like thesis wasn't even photographs; it was a sculpture. So I'm like, happy to find this Holga and to like just experiment and play around with the medium and to experience these areas that are familiar to me but are unfamiliar to me again. This was in Chinatown of the Vietnam Memorial, where there's a US soldier and a Vietnamese soldier. And that's the end of my presentation.
Brandon, before we go into the group conversation, do you mind expounding a little bit on the soil and how you've been gathering it, where you've been gathering it
Oh.
from, so the audience has a better understanding of that role?
Yes. So the soil I've been collecting along the Gulf Coast around Seabrook, Texas, in Old Chinatown, in Easttown Town, which is Easttown Town, Humble, which is one of my family homes that we migrated to when the second home that we first lived at, and then as well as the new Chinatown. So I've been collecting these dirt, and they have different shades, and they slowly became hard and became like rocks. And like it has some pieces living in it, and it's alive and it has so much history to it. So later on in after this like residency at the Asia Society, I'm gonna put the dirt into the boat and then revisit these sites where I pull the boat with the land collected and pull it through these spaces, kind of like the weight that I carry with the trauma from my family.
I think that's the thing. That's one thing that was very striking to me when it was first coming in, is how much life it does have.
Right?
There's sort of an electric static quality to that soil once it's in the space that I wasn't expecting. So that's been something that's really been interesting to watch unfold.
Yeah, and it was a lot of soil. And I kind of want more, to be honest.
Okay, I think maybe we can pivot to Laura and Ashley coming into the conversation. Maybe I can start us off with asking you both about this intergenerational approach that's present in both of your work, sort of how that's part of your research, but also if you can talk with us a little bit about how it comes across in the installations. And maybe Laura, can we start with you?
Yes, intergenerational storytelling has just always been a part of like my Mexican culture to share stories, folklore stories, stories about the families. And but what I found was really interesting, that there were stories that were about um, uh, kind of daily habits that were occurring today, and not so much about the stories that got us to where we are. So I was curious, and I started to ask those questions, and it meant that I had to turn to the sources and ask my mom and my uncles or my aunts and just extended relatives. And I found how that started to open up um, a whole different perspective for me, revisiting as an adult, seeing things differently. And I began to see just how important it is to share that intergenerational voice. And this allowed me then to turn it inward, ask myself some questions, change the conversations at home for sure. Um, with my children, being able to then open up discussion that with my husband that perhaps I hadn't shared before, simply because I just didn't know. Not quite to that degree. I knew it in a different lens, and that was a childhood lens. A lot of play involved, a lot of happy memories. And as you revisit as an adult, you see deeper with the wisdom of life that life has granted you. And it not only changed like the home environment, it changed the relationship that I have with these extended family members in ways that I wasn't expecting. To hear responses of hesitancy to share stories, that kind of took me by surprise. And then perhaps the person that I thought would be most hesitant was the most open. And so yeah, the sharing that way has been really important, and how I try to introduce that to the work as well, to be sensitive to that, because that's one thing that came out of these shared storytelling, like the feelings, the experiences, the trauma, the joy. And I tried to reflect that in the work. There's pieces that you can tell are of joy stories, sorrow stories. Yeah.
Brandon, what about you?
Yeah, like a lot of my research going into my work, I base on my family stories, and I think it's really important because it wasn't spoken about growing up, and in school they never really taught about the Vietnam War. And I knew I was from Vietnam and my family was from Vietnam, but I guess for me it's learning that and like trying to unpack that, especially because my grandma, who is like the keeper of all this knowledge, who knows all the family members before her, I'm trying to relearn that from her before she passes, and hopefully it's not soon. And it's been really eye-opening. And like there's, when I look back now as an adult to my childhood, I can see the intergenerational trauma that happens, and like the reasons why my mom acts the way she does. And like she wouldn't eat before, but unless I have eaten and my sister has eaten, or she'll just eat my leftovers. Me and Laura were talking about that earlier today. And for my family, these stories that I just basically, it brings up more stories and it opens up dialogue between us. And I'm very cautious with how I tell the story, especially, and I'm also a little nervous about telling my family story just because it's so deep rooted and personal, and it's very sensitive for me and my family. But my grandma has said that it's so important that I am telling her story, because for her, she's not able to do so. And she was like, you should write a book. And I'm like, I'm not a writer, but I am an artist. I can make art about your story. And she's been one of my number one fans. She shows up to my events and all my things, my talks. And yeah, family is just so important. And for me, it really impacts my own identity and my understanding of being Asian American.
I think one of the things, Bridget, that when you nominated, I thought of Laura's work, and we talked about Brandon's work, and just kind of the similarities that are kind of embedded in the artistic practice, and the in terms of themes that y'all are thinking about intergenerational. You're both looking at matriarchal women, or matriarchy in your family. You're also thinking about materiality. And one of the things that, when I went to visit the space, I was blown away in, and how each of y'all, and even Bridget and I talked about this earlier, are on a very different lens. So like Laura, one of the things that I really appreciate about your work is how you're using the materials to abstract the stories and weave in, and you're still trying to, and you're finding in terms of how to further explore bringing in other representations of stories into the weavings. Where Brandon, I think that your space, as you talked about, being in the white cube, being very experiential, like there's smell, there's energy, like that dirt really charges the space, and the way in which you're handling material, but you're also at this point where you're interested in abstracting those stories even more. And so one of the things that I was, when we, as y'all were talking about your presentation and your work in terms of the aspects of telling your stories, how much, I guess there's always a negotiation on how much you want to tell and how much that balance between your family that you're talking about, but also how much do you want the audience to know and really be able to like go in and identify key points? Or is it, are you, in some ways you're creating your own code, based on the work, but really like how much of that represented story do you really want your audience to work out with, and what is that negotiation process like?
Yes, that's definitely something that I'm working through right now, and that I'm so appreciative of the space because it's really allowing me to do that. Like, how do I introduce these stories? Because the practice started off with kind of simultaneously and separate at the same time. I'm doing reflecting back on the image where the tea bags are. Those conversations were already in my head, as a Mexican American, where do I stand in this timeline of this beautiful culture? And then how do I move that forward through my family? What will I introduce or ask them to carry? So revisiting that and learning these stories, I started writing and journaling. I journal quite a bit, and sometimes they're pages long and sometimes they're just little blurbs, but that together, so the two parts of the practice were growing at the same time. And so naturally the question began to be like, how do I take these two abstracts of writing and making the art and put them together? And it just inherently, the weaving is there. Weaving is storytelling. So I'm looking for ways to remain sensitive to the trauma and the healing. And just because it's healing doesn't necessarily mean it's meant to be shared. And so being sensitive to those things, how do I do that? And the space is allowing me to push that through this idea of creating a video clip or an audio clip, and all of which I'm self-teaching. And so I feel very vulnerable myself sharing that story and trying to put it together. So it is a sensitive point in when I'm sitting in the studio, how to do that. And I am looking for ways to push that, sharpen the story a little more, without necessarily revealing every single personal detail. And I think I can do that through some of the writing, and that's what I'm trying to do moving forward, to introduce some of the writing where there is a little bit more clarity, where sometimes we do need a little more clarity to understand these complexities. As mentioned before, the practice, my work, I do talk about racism and classism, ageism, these things, and that doesn't necessarily come out so clearly in the work, but I do know that from the artist's hand, that is part of the work. And so trying to find ways to marry that and put it out, to be experienced, to be discussed, to be felt, is something that is really important to me and that I'm working on.
Yeah, for me, I feel that I'm slowly moving into a direction where my work is becoming not necessarily about my family anymore, but about like the migration experience. So a lot of like I had a studio visit with someone that just came to visit the spaces, and she was looking at my altar that I created and was telling me that in her African culture, her mom has like an altar similar. So I think now I've been also careful about telling my family story, and I also realized that it's my story and my family story, and I don't have to tell or give the viewers everything. So that's kind of where I'm at now in my practice, where I'm kind of leaning away of telling it all and more and I think that's maybe why I'm more doing like abstractions of the stories or abstractions of that history, and even the abstractions kind of mimic like my understandings of my family stories that have been abstracted or like I'm still trying to figure out myself.
Definitely.
We have a sort of a process-oriented question from an audience member, so I'm going to share that. It's a question from Maureen. She says, I had the pleasure of seeing everyone's beautiful work in progress a couple of weeks ago. Does making the work in a public space change your process at all? Brandon, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so it's definitely interesting making the work in a public space, because I want to engage with the viewers when they're here, or like, so I think that's what I like most about working in a public space is being able to engage with the viewers and to really show them and like explain in details more about it and like hear what they have to say, because a lot of the times they'll mention something or like they'll tell me a story of how it relates to their own experiences or their family's migration story, and I really like to hear that from others because it's not just a Vietnamese experience, it's a lot of people's experience.
Yes, it definitely changes the process for me. um, again, the storytelling, this personal one-on-one connection, to have that, and then I walk into the studio and it's not my typical little kitchen nook where I work and surrounded by objects and just kind of familiar connections that allow me to contemplate and then to kind of fill that presence for me. And then I walk into this huge gallery and it's a big white cube and I'm like, what?
It's
I
very intimidating.
Yeah, and I felt very just little in that, and was lacking the connection that I can so easily access when I'm in my smaller space at home. And it changed the process in the sense that in the sense that I was a little hesitant to pull things out. I really was. The other day, Bridget was helping me with some installation. She's like, looked and she's like, the needle really moved today. And I was like, yeah, yeah, because so much of this is like, again, from the writing and the internal thoughts that I have, and then I have this opportunity in which I can really push that. So trying to find that, but it actually meant I needed to put that work up, and never actually having had the opportunity to expand on the space as such, also posed a challenge. So I realized the speed at which I was going to have to work to really push through was going to have to speed up. And so yeah, it has been a real challenge to take a process that normally is created through very timely, sensitive, long layers, and to kind of speed that up, to speed it up so that I can get back to that point of that personal connection that I find happens through storytelling that is so important to me. And so, yeah, so the needle had to move. I realized that all of a sudden. I'm like, let's get this stuff up and let's start getting some people in here and sharing some stories and adding to the work, because every time I sit with someone, I'm moved by where they stand, by where they are right there, and it all impacts my work moving forward.
One of the things that I really appreciate about both of your work is that you talked about, even just in your brief artist talk, about grounding yourself in the space or within your materials, and you know, in your process. And so I'm wondering if you can, you know, you talked about how your practice has changed in terms of being in the gallery space and people entering, but could you maybe walk us through some of your preparatory steps or rituals that you observe as you're starting to begin your process?
Yeah, so like, well, I do go to the farmers markets. And now I find like I want to go personal fast. Which is hard for me. I tend to be a very private person. I am more of a I'm gonna sit back and just listen kind of thing. Um, but it's a relationship. It's relationship building. It's communication with another. And so realizing that it's a reciprocal thing, you know, working on that and trying to find new ways to incorporate more positive rituals, because I can't always go to the farmers market. And I actually feel a little sad. One of my favorite farmers markets here in Houston is a really big one. It has a long history, the Canino's Market. I don't even quite believe that it's Canino's anymore. And it was like a farmer market store, and then like land would be leased out or something. I don't really know the whole structure on that. And it felt, you know, you could walk through there, and those were the places I like to really go and visit. And so that's changing. And when I went back not too long ago and I saw it, I was so excited with the change and at the same time so sad. And I thought, the first thing I thought is like, what am I gonna do? Where am I gonna go? You know, but a new ritual that I have is picking up plants and leaves and things and really spending some time wondering about the land that I found it on, how it helps sustain others, what, you know, our connection to that. And I'm excited about this new ritual, taking walks and picking up. The other day I went for a walk in the neighborhood, and there was a neighbor that had a cotton bush, and I was so excited, and then immediately started having this internal conversation about, you know, the labor of that, what that meant, who's been affected, the history of all of that. And I came home and was so moved to just start writing and working again. So yeah, there are some new rituals, and I'm excited to see how that'll actually impact the work. As you know, it was already there. Like the fruit is there, the plants, the how we sustained ourselves, the work that it created to move on and move forward, but kind of pivoting and taking a different look at it.
Definitely. And Brandon?
Yeah, for me, I feel like most of the times before I start an idea or start a project, I just like to sit in the space, wherever, at home or in a park or something, and I like to just sit and to be with my thoughts, be with my ancestors, and just really just think and and that's mostly what I do. And I like to sit in just silence and just to think. I also like to photograph too, and just like go out and explore these different parts of Houston, where a lot of Vietnamese people lived or have moved out from, but you can still see like the remnants of them, which is could be like the paints or the roofings of a space, or like the names that are been like burnt down or like washed out. So I've been taking a lot of walks around, and I also just really enjoy sitting with my thoughts and kind of meditating on them, and especially with everything going on in the world.
We have excellent questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to turn to some of those now. This is a question from Alexandra for Brandon. Now that you've assembled the altar, which was born in the artist's space, will you be able to keep the assembly of it together in some way?
Yes, so I photographed it already, and my friend also photographed it. Um, a lot of it is from my grandma and my mom's house, which they have graciously let me borrow, but a lot of the times when I borrow something, I don't return them, and they know this too.
They know where you live, though.
Yes.
In good hands, I'm sure.
Yes. So I will definitely probably be keeping it, and a lot of their stuff, they want me to inherit too, essentially. So I do plan on keeping the altar, and I'll probably put it into my house too. Hopefully, my cat doesn't destroy it though.
The terror of ash.
Yes.
We have a question from Matt for both of you. Maybe Laura, can we please start with you? He's asking, what is your process in selecting materials you use to make your work?
I spend a lot of time in the produce section now. I think I always have, but being more aware of that, I find that I'm not even quite looking at the produce anymore, but the people who are shopping in the area, in the store, looking for ways to just kind of think and see and feel. And I tend to ask for material. I go look, and there's always a story that comes with that because they're like, today, especially, I was at HEB the other day and I was looking for onion skin. Well, I wasn't actually looking for onion skin, although sometimes I look for some of those materials because those twist ties, I can't see the produce section anymore without seeing all the history and the stuff behind that. So I was at the store and I asked, I just saw it. I was like, you can't throw that away. There's such beautiful storytelling that can come out of this. I will make it happen. Could I please have those onion skins or that box? And they look at me kind of funny and they're like, well, you're not going to eat it, are you? Because I think there's a fine line about what they can give away and what they can't. And I said, no, it's onion skin. I said, but I like the texture. And I started talking and telling. And so right there's more opportunities to kind of expand on and talk about the materials. So about how I go about finding the material, it's just kind of very organic. Sometimes I pick up the material off the ground. Some of those burlap, not the burlap, the plastic bags aren't always just used for the produce. And I know this because I've seen it. Debris on the floor from the construction all around us, holding tools or objects that are being used for the building. I've seen it, and I also remember it from childhood memories. My father and many uncles and relatives were longshoremen, and seeing remnants of this come back home, and even digging through parents' garage. So it's not bought, but it is found, and I look for ways to bring that back to the studio, and it always comes back with a new experience and a new story with it. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I'm never really just looking for one specific material.
Yeah, I agree with that too. For my practice, I've been just like when I go out and shoot in these specific sites, I will just find different objects or different. I tend to find a lot of clothing in these spaces, and the clothing itself has so much history to it, or like makes me think about who it belongs to, or like how did this clothes end up in the middle of a field, or when I was in Chinatown, I found like one of those like pedicure sandals, like flip-flops that people would wear. So I took that. I want to do something with that, kind of like talking about the labor of Vietnamese women specifically. And my whole family used to do hair and nails. Now they just do hair. And just collecting like rice bags from my family, and also from my family's belongings, which is up for grabs for me. So it really, I don't know what I'm gonna find, but I tend to find things and I'll just collect them along the way when I explore different areas.
Brandon, you just brought up something that was really interesting for me in terms of thinking about labor and the connection to land with both of your practices. And so I'm wondering if you can also, I mean, you talked a little bit about this in your presentation, but like how important even like the sites are. Like I know you collected dirt, and like one of the things that I wrote down was points of origin and how origin, land, and the labor all kind of go together, or in I guess in accompanying into your other practice of telling the stories?
Yeah. So for me, the land carries so much weight and carries so much labor. And I also look at like the history of Vietnamese people especially along the coast, who worked in shrimper and fisherman boats who were oppressed by the KKK. So I find a lot of the land itself also speaks on the labor itself, the land that they're working on. Um, and my own family's experiences working as uh, hair and nail techs, which is very like, oh, cliche or stereotypical that people would say about the Vietnamese refugees. But most nail salons in the US, I think it's like around 90% are owned and operated by Vietnamese women, um, which show a lot of the resilience and the power that they have. They dominate this one area of labor. So I've been exploring that a lot in my work as well. And it's something I want to explore more of.
We have a question from Joseph for Laura. Do you find a performative element emerging as you create? And does it help you connect to the often repetitive labor that your work addresses?
Oh, yes. So that's been a really wonderful discovery for me. I was making the work, and it gets to a point where, yes, it can be very repetitive and really laborious. If you recall, those are 4,000 twist ties that are hanging up there, and took place a little bit over a year to make just those. Those were also things that I did during a repetitive routine, dropping kids off at school, picking them up, going to doctors, picking them up. So that in itself, again, it does get a little bit eek. And then just kind of stopping to take a break, but from the actual labor, but the feeling, the sentiment and the story is still building. And I didn't know how to put that back into the work. And so I do find myself moving to a sort of performance. I don't know what to call it, and that's okay, I think. But I think I'm just growing as a storyteller, where there is that natural performance in the way you tell a story. And I can't, I find that sharing the work and making the work is now just an automatic kind of move towards that. So yes, being really excited to be in a space as big as the gallery space that we have, to not only explore that visually by introducing the audio and the video, but then to perhaps maybe before its end, I will just be speaking and sharing and performing of some sort. But I do see that as an element that's definitely growing and building in the work, and I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think from Joseph's question, that idea of the performative nature of labor, I also have really been struck by the way that labor marks time and can be a measurement of time. I've seen that with your twist ties, and after working with Brandon in the soil, I think of Brandon's time spent collecting the soil. So that's something that struck me very much about both of your installations.
Yeah, and I actually recorded every time that I collected soil too, and I want to work with the video for that because in itself is a performance of labor, cause and it's very tedious, and like the noises of the sand, I mean of the dirt, and like the noises of the shovel hitting the ground, it's very jarring.
Brandon, you said that was 10 buckets of soil.
No, so it's actually 12.
Wow.
But I want more. And they're pretty big. Like they're like this big. It doesn't look as big piled up in the gallery because the gallery is so big, I guess, but there were so much and it was so many trips. And thank you so much for my friends who who have vehicles that can fit all this dirt because my little car cannot.
I love
Ashley, I think we have probably time for one more question from each of us. So I want to give you an opportunity to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I love that you brought dirt into the gallery. I mean, just in my personal practice too, like I have a jar of dirt from my grandparents' house. So understanding the points of origin and how important that is. I think, one of the things, I mean, it's so beautiful to have known y'all before this experience and kind of seen y'all over the last year, grow in your practice and then be in the Artists on Sites exhibition. And just wondering for me, I guess my last question would be like, what are you working on? What are y'all excited about moving towards next?
I'm really excited about the kind of exploring that point of origin. The land. I recently had an opportunity to like visit Marfa, and that's like a whole different side of Texas. The terrain is very different, but yet it still holds a history of immigration, migration, and all its own complexities, being border towns of its own. So really excited about this idea of introducing and really developing further this plant life connection and kind of, well, really just that. I mean, there's so much more for me to learn. Like, I'm like, what is this? What is this plant? And oh, you can eat it, and then like, wow, just thinking about that sustainability in our relationship to the land. You know, the work right now, my relationship is, like making that connection through the object, the plastics, and it's, the less organic thing of it, but like to go one step more and like directly from the land. I'm really excited about that part.
And Brandon?
I'm excited. So in June, me and one of my best friends and someone who I'm really inspired by, Antonius Buie, we're doing a performance hosted by the Houston Asian American Archive at Rice University together. So it's going to be a performance video piece, kind of exploring the land and the Vietnamese migration throughout these lands. So I'm really excited for that, coming soon. It's in the works.
Well, I look forward to seeing whatever you put forth into the world. I think, like I said, it's been an honor just to kind of see y'all both grow through this process and in the direction of your work.
Thank
so Bridget,
you.
I think back to you.
I'm going to give the last word to a member of our audience. And this was originally a question from Alexandra for Laura, but I'd really love to hear both of you weigh in on it. This idea of having multiple identities. And I wonder if you can, for Alexandra, answer, how would you describe the way you interact with them? Are they superimposed on top of each other? Are they always at work in you simultaneously, or do you move between them like rooms? And maybe Laura, we can start with you.
Yeah, something I'm always asking myself. I find it's very fluid. I don't think that I always saw it that way. I thought it had to be one way or another, and it was really hard. And a lot of that questioning is always still in my practice. Sometimes, even when I want to be fluid, the world doesn't allow me to. And I think that's why the work started with names. I mean, I've been in a situation where you walk into the room and you say Laura Drey, and I don't fit the picture, so that's what I mean by like sometimes the world doesn't allow you to remain fluid and to practice all the beauty of that history that we bring. So that is something that's always there, but I do see it as layering. And if you think about that weave process, it goes down and then it comes back up, and that's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree with Laura too. In my work, I see myself as an in-between state of being Vietnamese and being American, and I feel like my work is helping me inform that identity for myself. Like I feel like I'm not Vietnamese. I'm not too Vietnamese and I'm not too American. So I'm in this weird in between state of belonging and identity where it's like if I go to Vietnam, I'm American, and if I'm here, I'm Vietnamese. So I think, and it's even with my name. When I first started, before I was an artist, I didn't even use my middle name. But now that I am an artist, I have realized the power of my name and of my Vietnamese middle name, and I want to hold on to that because it's my life, it's my lineage.
I love that.
Thanks.
A huge thank you to both you, Brandon and Laura, for sharing your insights and for sharing your practice with all of us at Asia Society and everyone who has the great opportunity to come and visit you in person in the galleries. Ashley, thank you so much for your insights tonight, but also being a part of this process from the very beginning. A huge debt of gratitude for all that you've contributed to the initiative. And on behalf of my colleagues, just thanks to the three of you. Thank you in the audience for spending time with us. We hope that you'll return next Wednesday at 7 to hear directly from Ahra and Royal. And of course, all of this is possible because of the generous support of many wonderful patrons. And our presenting sponsors for this initiative, as well as these programs, are Nancy C. Allen and Leslie and Brad Bucher. Major support comes from Chin Hee Jun and Eddie Allen, the Brown Foundation, the Houston Endowment, and the City of Houston through Houston Arts Alliance. Generous funding is also provided by the Clayton Fund, Texas Commission on the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, Wortham Foundation, Agnes Shu Tung, PhD, and Oscar Tang. United Airlines is our official airline partner, and funding is also provided through contributions from the exhibition's patron circle. So on behalf of all of us, a big thank you to all of those donors. And again, have a wonderful evening. Thank you for spending time with us, and we hope to see you in the gallery so you can visit with Brandon and Laura in person. Thanks so much.